After all that.
It was a big thing. We were trying to short that service just enough to like so you can actually attend the forum and not run real late.
Foiled again, Chris. It is a tremendous joy and privilege for me to introduce Dr. Carolee Cook. Dr. Cook has a PhD in Hebrew Bible from Emory University, and she published her dissertation in 2020 on trauma and religion, and that's with Brill. And Dr. Cook is a teacher at Cranbrook, but I am so grateful that she is going to be sharing some of the research that she's been doing with us. And I think that this is going to go deeper than most of us have ever gone when it comes to the Hebrew Bible, and that's really, really important for us to do. And I love the way that she does it in such a beautiful, faithful way, which lifts up the text and asks us to ask ourselves some tough questions. So without further ado, will you join me in welcoming Dr. Cook?
Thank you. Okay, so this is going to be a three-part series. We're going to talk about the joys of childbirth today. We're going to talk about the perils of childbirth next week, and then the miracle of childbirth the following week on the 18th. So one thing that I want to clarify before I start is, one, I really, really like questions throughout, so feel free if you have a question, don't wait till there's a pause, just raise your hand, and I will happily pause and address your question then. And two, we need to differentiate between the religion of the Hebrew Bible and the religion that was practiced on the ground in ancient Israel, because those are not necessarily the same thing. So the religion of the Hebrew Bible is what you're used to reading, the stuff from the text. You've got all the stories, you've got the belief about the law and the covenant and everything. And then the religion of ancient Israel is the religion that they practiced on the ground, what they actually did versus what the text said they did. And that includes a lot of the stories that you don't hear, like the stories of the women. And that's what we're really going to dive into today. So the first thing that we need to talk about is women and children. Some of this is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Some of this has been found through archaeological evidence, through archaeological digs. So I'm assuming we all know and can agree that the Hebrew Bible is a patriarchal society. It's dominated by men, which is why men's voices dominate in the text. This is pretty true on the ground as well. Most ancient societies fit this build of a patriarchal society. What's kind of unique to the Hebrew Bible and ancient Israelite religion is this concept of the house of the father, or Beit Av. Yeah, the Hebrew right there. So the house of the father isn't necessarily like a nuclear family kind of house of the father, but rather the idea that the man who's in charge of the clan takes care of everybody in it. And so the house of the father is the dominant, maybe protective family system in this ancient context. We also have spheres of sexuality. And this is the idea that women's sexuality is controlled by men. And this isn't necessarily a control thing in a bad way, it's also a form of protection. So it was up to the father and the brothers to protect the girl whenever she was young, and then when she got married, it was up to her, her husband and her sons to protect her. And so this is something that we're going to see throughout the text, and this is why, for example, when we see texts in the Hebrew Bible of women getting into a dangerous situation, it's the fathers and the brothers or the husband who defend her. We also have the concept of marriage. Marriage looked different in the Hebrew Bible than it does today in the sense of it was usually an arranged thing. And you wouldn't necessarily marry within your exact clan, but you would marry within your ethnic group. Exogenous marriages were not really, they were often frowned upon. So if you think, for the example of the book of Ruth, where Naomi goes and marries somebody outside of her clan, and then she comes back, people are kind of like, whoa, why are you coming back? This is weird. Like, you left us, stay where you were. So most of the time you would marry within your ethnic group, and girls would get married pretty young. Once they hit puberty, they would often be married off. So we're talking marriage around somewhere between 13, 15, 17. 17 would be getting pretty up there. And they would usually be marrying someone who was probably at least 10 years older than them. And again, this isn't to knock like the ancient Israelite world, but rather to say like this is pretty common in the ancient world. The husbands were typically much older than their wives. Okay, any questions so far? Yes.
Did he bribe Christ?
Yes, there would be an exchange of something. It wouldn't necessarily be a money, but it would be some sort of exchange. Yeah, typically there would be. Yes.
Now, who paid it?
The father usually.
The parent of the bride?
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so pregnancy is never proclaimed in the Hebrew Bible. And by this I mean, no one's gonna just go out and say, hey, I'm like 6 weeks along. No one's gonna say that in real life, hold on. No one's gonna say like, I'm like 12 weeks along. Because one, they wouldn't know that necessarily, but two, that was a good way to try to like jinx the situation. They're not gonna use the terms of jinx, but it's the same idea. It's like tempting fate. Because pregnancy was a very high risk endeavor in the ancient world, and so you wouldn't announce it. To announce it would be to basically ask for the pregnancy to fall through and not work, to end in miscarriage. It's also never proclaimed because, again, it's men who are writing the Hebrew Bible, and they're not really altogether comfortable with the idea of pregnancy and childbirth. That's the women's sphere of things. And so that's another reason it doesn't really get announced. So we're not having like gender reveal parties in the ancient world. Like that's not happening. We're not even having like baby showers in the ancient world. None of that is going on. No balloons. No forest fires started by people exploding things either, their gender reveal parties. We also see infertility as a really big issue in the Hebrew Bible. And this was always attributed to the woman and never to the man. And again, men are writing this text, and it would have been seen as really embarrassing to the man to say, oh, this infertility is happening because of the man and not the woman. So instead we get phrases like, the woman's womb has been closed by God. And we'll see that today in some of our texts. And infertility was a really kind of dangerous situation for the woman because, again, we have these spheres of protection. And if a woman doesn't have a son, when her husband dies, she's left with no one to take care of her. And this is why orphans and widows in the Hebrew Bible are seen as kind of some of the most vulnerable people in the ancient world. Whenever it says you have to protect the most vulnerable among you, the orphans and the widows, the reason for this is there's no one left to protect the widow if she doesn't have a son. Okay, so we have infertility. Children are also seen as a gift. Sons were preferred, but daughters were also seen as a gift. And sons were preferred, again, because they would protect the woman and provide for the woman, their mother, once the father died. And then lastly, we have this idea of naming. I don't know that we're going to see it today in their text, but often in the Hebrew Bible, we see women, the mothers, naming the children. Typically, it would actually be men who would be doing the naming, but in the Hebrew Bible, we see some of that reversal going on. Names weren't given until about the 8th day of life. And the reason for that is that first 7 days were the most dangerous time period. And you didn't want to tempt any demons or anything like that by giving away the name. If they didn't know the name, the demons couldn't come and snatch like the life away from the child. So they would wait a week before they would name the child, or at least before they would announce the name of the child. They would not just be calling their child nothing. They would know the name, but they wouldn't announce it for about a week afterwards. And that's actually still seen in the Jewish tradition today. Boys have a naming ceremony about 8 days after birth. Kind of contemporary, like happening at the same time as the circumcision. All right, so we're gonna look at some iconography here in a second, but one thing I wanna talk about first is midwives. I'm not sure what you picture when you picture childbirth in the ancient world or in ancient Israel, but what was happening was there were pretty much no men involved in this situation. It was all women. So women that were close to the woman who was giving birth, and also midwives would come in. Midwives who were practiced in the art of delivering children, obviously without the modern technology and medicines and things, but they had things to ward off evil, and statues and things to ward off evil. They could make like poultices and things, but very much limited by the technology of the ancient world. So we had midwives, though, and they also did not give birth typically lying down. And so we know this because we find images of childbirth, and also we find birthing stools. So women would give birth usually in a squatting or a seated position. So I've got some images for what this looks like with this first. This would be an example of, all right, here's some full disclosure with archaeology. Archaeologists will find things and they'll say really, really certainly, oh, this is what this object is. And then 20 years later, somebody will say, well, actually, I think it might be this. And the reality is there's no like manual that tells us what things are, and so we make our best guess. So these are Judahite pillar figurines. They are found all over northern Israel and southern Judah, and we don't really know what they are. But our best guess at the moment, and please understand this might change in 5 minutes, probably I won't know in 5 minutes, but they might change in 5 minutes, that they were used by women to help become pregnant. So they were like an antidote to infertility. How that was used, we're not entirely sure, but that's our best guess. But we find these everywhere. And so it's our best guess because of the way that they're presenting their breasts in a way that suggests fertility. So we find these pretty much everywhere. And now to the promised birthing scenes. So we don't find any really in ancient Israel, but we do find some in Egypt and Rome and Greece. So I've got Egypt and I think Rome. So this is an example of, oh yeah, I am not mic'd. Okay, so of an Egyptian birthing scene where the gods are assisting the woman, some sort of queen, in childbirth. And so you can see she's standing on birthing stones, or you can at least see she's in a squatted position, and she is giving birth in this position. So this is an example of an Egyptian birthing scene from about the same time period. This is what we're looking at in ancient Egypt, or ancient Israel. Okay. Questions, comments?
Those types of sculptures also found in, or have they been found in Egypt?
You mean Israel? Oh, the sculptures. Were they found in Egypt? I don't know if they were found in Egypt, but we find similar examples pretty much throughout the entire ancient world, like from the Neolithic period on. I don't know that Egypt really did that. I don't know that we found any in Egypt exactly specifically, but elsewhere definitely. Yes.
Has there been any speculation about how the fertility figurines were reconciled with the admonitions against idolatry and that sort of thing?
The closest we get is the story of Rachel in Genesis when she steals, when she steals the like items from her father to try to help her get pregnant, and she's looked down upon for the stealing, but like he had them in the first place. So this is one of those things where like the Hebrew Bible says this, but on the ground were they really like not doing this? Because a God that you can't really see and interact with is kind of difficult to relate to. When you're struggling, like when you have no concept of like science or modern medicine, like you need something to help you out, and there seems to be like the human nature of it all. So the Hebrew Bible's kind of silent on those issues, but we find them pretty much everywhere. Yeah.
You talked about marriage and infertility.
Mm-hmm.
Was a man normally taking the second woman if the first one was infertile?
Often. I don't know that it's ever like seen as like a causation, like she was infertile, so I took a second wife. But if you were wealthy, you often had more than one wife anyway, and so the man wasn't as worried. We'll see this with the example of Hannah here in the second text. The man wasn't as worried because he's already got sons, but the woman still needs a son to protect her.
Because where I come from, a long time, a few years ago, the normal thing was for a woman to get pregnant before marriage to prove she was fertile.
Gotcha. We don't see that happen. We don't see that happen in the Hebrew Bible, but that like makes logical sense. Yeah.
So if there's a situation with as there are many in the Bible of a man with multiple wives,
Mm-hmm.
the
The father primarily, but the father and the birth mother. Yeah, the father and the birth mother.
So if it's a son for protection, then his responsibility is to his mother, not to the
Not to the other wives. Yes, exactly.
And then just a comment about the sitting.
Mhm.
In other countries, actually, that is a practice. It's purely Western.
Yeah.
Sitting from
Yes, absolutely.
Just a quick interjection here. We do want to try to capture the questions
Okay.
for the recording, so we have two ways of doing that.
Do you want me to repeat them?
Wait for us to run over there, or you could do a quick repeated summary.
Okay, I'll do
Whichever.
a quick repeated summary. Okay. So here's a Roman midwife scene. This seems to be later on in the the labor process, because she seems to be tired and laying back with somebody there to support her, and perhaps the baby is on its way out. Hence why the woman, the second midwife, is there ready to grab the child. So this is another one we find. So again, we don't really find these images in Israel, but the fact that we're finding them early on in Egypt, later on in Rome, seems to be like this was a pretty common practice. And we do have evidence of the fact that midwives were a thing in ancient Israel as well. All right, one last image is an Egyptian birthing brick that we found. I'm not sure how well you can see it from your end, but there are hieroglyphs and images on there meant to like invoke the gods to say like, hey, like let this birth go smoothly and things like that. So we see the birthing bricks found pretty much everywhere because they were so common. All right, so this is what I've got on the history. My plan is now to delve into some of the texts of the Hebrew Bible. Does that sound good? Okay. So I've got a short text to start with because the long text would be like 3 chapters worth of things. So this would be a time. Can we grab a mic real fast? Okay. Does somebody want to give us a brief overview of what happens before this text? So before Sarah is giving birth, how did we get to this point? Does anyone know that story? She was very old. Good. Okay. Okay, yes. So, I'll just repeat. That's going to be easier. Okay, so, no worries. So, she's really old. She wants a child. She can't have a child, and God has promised her a child. Or these, like, 3 angel people that came in promised her that she was going to have a child, something to that effect. And she laughs, right? So she laughs when that happens. Like, yeah, okay, sure, I'm going to have a child. Like, I'm like 90 years old. I am so far past being able to have a child. Sure, okay. And she gives her handmaiden to Abraham and says, here, I'm not going to have a kid. Let's be real. Have a kid with her, and at least you got a son. And God says, no, you missed the point. That wasn't the way this was going to go. Great, now there's Ishmael. I don't know what we do with this. We're going to just send him off into the wilderness. Not like Sarah does that, but yeah. So that's how we end up at this birth scene. So you have the handout in your hand. I'm going to read it because it's really short. The next one I'll have you take a few minutes and read through, but this one I'll just read because it's 7 verses. So the Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised, making her pregnant. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him, and Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And now Sarah said, God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Because yitzhak and laughter, it's the same root in Hebrew. And she said, who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Okay, so I got some questions about this. First of all, what is surprising about this birth? Surprising. The age of the mother, yes. Okay, so absolutely, the age of the mother. She had no business bearing children at that age, and she somehow still managed to do it. So, age of the mother. What else is surprising?
How about the age of the father?
Yeah. The age of the father, absolutely. So the age of Abraham. Abraham is also super old. Is anything else surprising? Yeah, yeah, nursing and also raising the child. Yeah, so she's not only bearing a child in her old age, she's also going to be nursing and raising this child for presumably, at least 15 years until he's old enough to function. Yeah.
I guess I'm always surprised that she wanted to, given he had given her the two kings and, pretend you're my sister and
Yeah, they had a pretty
didn't treat her very well.
They had a pretty tenuous relationship. He would panic whenever they would encounter people in a foreign land and be like, she's my sister twice. Yeah, so he didn't treat her very well. So the fact that she wanted a child, even though with him, even though he was not always the best husband. Yeah, yes.
What's her alternative, though? Looking from today, looking back, that's not acceptable. But in reality, in her time frame, I'm not sure she had a lot of options. It's not like she could down the street into a condo and call something like that.
Yeah, divorce law gets real confusing in the Hebrew Bible, but also if you're 100 years old or 90 or however old she is in this, but way past menopause, what is her other option? Even if she does divorce him, what's she going to do? Absolutely. So she didn't super have a choice. She was committed to this situation. So why did Sarah laugh when God told her she would conceive? What?
I said better than crying.
Better than crying. Oh my gosh. But isn't that so true? Like crying and laughter are like so close together. Better than crying. Okay, she laughs because it's better than crying. Why else does she laugh? Yeah, because she's old. She thought it was impossible. And I think there's also a little bit of it, we didn't read this, but like, who are these people to come in and tell me like that I'm gonna conceive? Or tell my husband that I'm gonna conceive? Like, who are these people? They knew that they were some sort of like heavenly creatures, but angels would be the word, but like in human form, because usually angels are real scary looking. So they knew that, but like, yeah, like, is this really gonna happen? Like, okay, sure, God can do anything, but really, like, is this? And so that's why she laughs. Why do you think it's so important to Sarah that she bear a son?
For our own protection.
Yeah, okay, so for her own protection. So we are, at this point in the Hebrew Bible, super early. We are not even to the cities yet. We are basically, Abraham spends his whole life like sojourning around, like traveling around with Sarah. So he's not even really living in a city at this point. So yeah, so when he dies, and if Sarah's still alive, I genuinely don't even know what she would do, because they're not living in their own land. They're living as a ger, like a stranger in a foreign land. Like what would she do? It would be a really terrible situation. Okay, so for her own protection, she has to bear a son. Why else is it so important that she? Status. Yes. Related to that, so status was the answer there. Related to status is the promise that Abraham is going to have children, and his generations are going to be like as numerous as the stars. So without a son, that promise is in threat. The Hebrew people can't exist past Abraham if he doesn't have a son. And that's why Sarah's like, take my handmaiden, like take Hagar, take her and have a son with her, because at least like you have a hope in this. Because you can't have generations that come after you without a son. And that's where God says, no, like the whole point is me. Like the whole point is that I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the impossible for you. That you're going to have a son, and it's going to be through Sarah, and you're going to have many generations that come through Isaac and not Ishmael. Yes?
There's one other fold in this that is interesting to me, is that Abraham takes another wife, Keturah, and she bears him 6 sons, but they're not part of the covenant. Only Sarah's offspring, which is really, really interesting to me. Can you say a little bit more about that? I hope I'm not jumping ahead or moving sideways or whatever.
No, that's a perfect the perfect wrap up, and I think that goes back to the question of who do these sons belong to? Primarily the father, but also the mother. So the covenant then doesn't just go through Abraham; it goes through Abraham and Sarah specifically, and that was what God had promised, and that's why Ishmael and the sons through Keturah, like they aren't part of the covenant because it was promised between Abraham and Sarah. It was promised through the impossible. Through this woman who was infertile. And that's the important part, is Abraham and Sarah, nothing you do is going to make this happen. It's God who's going to make this happen. And that's the important piece of the covenant. Does that? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't even...
No, that was great. You didn't jump ahead. That was actually really, really great. What are Sarah's feelings about having a child? I'm going to go back one slide so you can look if you don't want to look at your handout. What are her feelings about having a child? Okay, define the laughter for me. What kind of emotion goes with that laughter?
It can be joyous, but it also can be derisive.
Derision. Yes, okay, so it can be like the joyful, but also derision. And you said mixed feelings. So yeah, that joy, but also, okay, derision.
I'm just really struck by the fact that this woman has been through so much because of something that is naturally identified with women and understandably identified with women, and yet causes so much pain exterior to her, right? I mean, so the ability and the desire to give birth to another human being is a profound and very complicated issue.
Yes.
And Sarah's whole entire experience is like writ large on paper for all of us to figure out. But I just keep thinking about her. You know, you feel like a less than person if you can't do this, and yet you're fully a human being, and to struggle with that. And then finally, because Isaac is finally born, right, she has this kind of like, vindication is mine, you know, and like, what does this mean? And I have a baby, and like all of those experiences have to be, you know, and then the whole postpartum stuff, right?
Yep.
I'm just so struck by how these real live experiences are experienced by many women, and therefore, I think Sarah's story is a real gift to us. So thank you for bringing.
Yeah. So all of those mixed feelings, and I think also a little bit of relief, or a lot of bit of relief in there too. Like, you know how sometimes you just laugh, like you're so relieved that something is over, you're so relieved something worked out, you just laugh. Because it's just like a burst of relief that comes out of you, because there's not really a noise that we have for relief. So sometimes it comes out in laughter. And I think there's that in there as well. And I also really love the line, everyone who hears will laugh with me. With me, yes, absolutely, yes. They will laugh with me. Laugh in relief, in joy, in derision at the absurdity of the situation. We're going to laugh with Sarah. In awe, yes, absolutely, and in awe with Sarah. All right, I'm going to move on to Hannah's birth story. Not Hannah's birth story, Hannah's birth of Samuel. So this one is a pretty long text. There was no way I could figure out how to shorten it and pull out the pieces that I wanted. So I think what I want to do is, what time do we go till?
We go till 9:45.
Okay.
Yeah, so you've got 15 minutes.
Okay, sweet. Can I give you maybe 5 minutes to read with a partner? Kind of skim. I know it's pretty long. To skim with a partner and just talk through some things that stick out to you. And then we'll spend the last 10 minutes talking through this and wrapping up. Uh-huh. Okay.
Because it switches over to the TriCaster upstairs.
Okay.
So, yeah, maybe like 42.
Okay. Sounds good.
Someone will get up. I'll do it this week, but Carson will do the takeover.
Okay. Sounds
It's
good.
going really well. I'm sorry about the guitar.
No, no, that was good. That was actually really helpful because that like put it all together.
Notice there's no little devices being shared.
What do you mean?
Eli doesn't say to her, here's this little clay object.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah. Yes. All right, you got about 30 seconds left. Okay. All right, so let's bring it back together. So we have this story of another woman who is infertile, who really, really wants a son. And her husband says, like, am I not worth 10 sons to you? What do you make of that response? It's always her fault. It's all about him. Yeah, like, I love you more than I love all my other wives. Yeah, sure, they gave me sons, but I love you more. Doesn't that count for anything?
Well, to me, it kind of surprised me that he wasn't more upset about not having a son, that it implied to me that it was almost a love relationship.
Yeah, so he wasn't upset that he didn't have a son with her, that it was a relationship based on love. It absolutely is. But also, he isn't upset because he already has sons. He has sons through the other wives. If it was just her, he might be more upset. We don't know. It's hard to say. But what's the issue here with Hannah not having a son? No protection, no future. Yeah, great, you love me while you're alive, but like, you're older than I am. You're probably gonna die first. Like, what's gonna happen to me? Like, I need a son. I need a son for protection. Yes?
I have a question. Was it totally selfish because she was going to give her son
Yeah, I think that would be part of the protection. Like, she wouldn't necessarily live with him, but I think the implication here is he would provide for her and protect her, though he wouldn't necessarily be living with her. Or perhaps maybe she would come live in this tabernacle area too. That isn't really attested very well. This time period in ancient Israelite history isn't very attested very well. So we don't know for sure, but yes, he would provide for her somehow. Or the tabernacle, somebody would provide for her on behalf of him. So what's the role of this whole like firstborn being given to the Lord? Like, what do you make of that? Of like given to the temple kind of thing. Not the temple, we don't have a temple yet, the tabernacle. Yeah, that whole, yes, you give the firstborn of everything to the Lord. So whether that's cattle or any sort of other livestock, when you have a fruit tree, you let it grow for 6 years, and that 7th year you give the fruit to the Lord. Like all of those things, first things go to the Lord. And so Hannah's like, I'm gonna follow this. If you give me a son, I'm gonna follow this, because I will have a child to protect me, I will have a child to love, even though I won't necessarily be raising him, I will have this child. And so I will give him to the Lord. Exactly. Yes?
What does it mean if she's given him to the Lord? How is he going to support them? I mean, what's given to the Lord mean?
Given to the Lord meaning that he will serve as a Nazirite or serve as like a priest that's taking care of the tabernacle and taking care of the Ark of the Covenant, all of these things. So he's going to protect her, not like physically, but he will be able to protect her financially. And through the power, I mean like the monetary power of the tabernacle, he will be able to support her that way.
So he doesn't take the vow of poverty when he's given to the Lord?
No. No, there's not really a vow of poverty going on. Okay, and then, so we've talked about why Hannah so desperately desired a son. We've talked about this with Sarah too, like the human aspect. We've talked about the protective aspect, the just desire to have a child with your husband aspect. All of these things are evident throughout. So we've got about 4-ish minutes till we have to wrap up. So I want to give you time to ask any final questions that you might have.
I think what's so interesting about these stories is how they somehow imply that a certain level of fidelity or faithfulness will generate you a certain outcome. There's a cause and effect, if you will, in the Old Testament. And accordingly, the lack thereof is a reflection of perhaps lack of faith. You just didn't, Hannah, you just weren't observant enough or faithful enough, or consequently, if you are more faithful or make more sacrifices or do more rituals, then God will bless you. And I think this is so interesting because there are certainly modern day implications for that. There are women who experience infertility, and the natural human instinct is to say it must be a result of me just not going to church enough, or maybe I just am not faithful enough, or it's in my own power to control. So I think the whole notion of trust, which we see in the Abraham story, and how long can you trust? I mean, till you're 100, till it's beyond physical possibility to conceive a child, and when do you need to employ human intervention to take? This is a really profound human drama, I think, that sort of relates through these stories.
Yes. So I think, yes, what you're talking about is what we call in Hebrew Bible scholarship retributive theology. If you do something good, God will bless you. If you do something bad, God will punish you. And so that whole idea of faithfulness bearing fruit, bearing a child, is absolutely present in the Hebrew Bible, and it does have the implications for people today who might think that same way. And in the same way, you're like, okay, well, how long do I trust versus how long until I like act and do something else? We see that happen with like the Judahite pillar figurines. This is what we see. Like, okay, great, sure. How long am I supposed to trust before I turn to these like magical religious elements to fix things? These same questions that were happening in Bronze Age ancient Israel are still happening today. We don't necessarily use pillar figurines, but we do use infertility treatments, and we turn to science. And I'm not in any way going to say that's a bad thing. I think that's the human aspect of this. That how long do you trust before you turn to something else? Or how long do you trust and also do something else? And I think that that's the element that we see, and that's why we have that difference between Hebrew Bible and ancient Israelite religion, because sometimes you need, or often, always, you need both. Yes.
Point that out, that the trusting, you can also, the trusting could encompass the, the trusting in the procedures that are available to you. Those are not, those are not mutually exclusive
Right,
at all.
exactly.
The other thing I just that struck me here was that Hannah actually made a bargain, right?
Yep.
I mean, she said, if this, then if you give me the child, I'll
Yeah.
give him back to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
She does also do that.
Could you please address maybe a little bit of why the priest treated her the way he treated her? Why Eli treated her that way? Basically, Hannah, I'm sorry, when she was praying, the priest basically accused her of being drunk, and then,
This is one of those
Yeah.
texts that gets talked about like that, like of all this whole chapter, that's usually the part that gets pulled out, that people want to, or like that scholars really want to zero in on. I think it just goes down to the fact that a woman was praying at the temple by herself, and also she was doing it in a way that he wasn't used to. That wasn't the way he would normally expect anybody, but especially a woman, to come pray, to doing it silently. And she's so into her prayer, she's so desperate that she looks like she's just like talking to herself. And that's why he's talking to her that way. Not that it's right, but that's why he's doing it.
Any last questions?
Can you say something about these two birth stories, and there's two women who aren't getting along? Okay. The two women that in both birth stories, they kind of go at each other. What are we learning from them?
We're learning about the complexities of polygamy, that when men have multiple wives, the wives don't always get along, and especially there can be jealousy, especially over issues of children. And we see that, I'm not even speaking to the modern context because I'm not qualified to do that, but in the ancient context, we see that pretty consistently. Oh, next, do you want me to, so next week we're going to talk about the perils of childbirth. We'll talk about two women who die in childbirth and the risks of having children in the ancient world. And I know you guys want to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you. Join me in thanking Dr. Cook for her time. And we'll see you same time next week.
Thanks.